I feel sometimes I feel like a sardine.
I am lost. Fire!
Welcome to the rodeo out here. This is Rodeo Cowboy Steve. As you can tell, my hairline's fading more than normal, but I'm still out here riding like a cowboy, all right? Let me tell you about what's going on. The horses escaped the pasture 7 days in a row at my local farm, where we sell human eggs. You might ask what those are. We feed them to the horses, and they gain super strength and power. Power that's bigger than the whole globe. I'm just a farmer out here, okay?
Welcome back to the podcast.
I was looking for the addition, which I probably should have told you beforehand, was like, sir, this is a Wendy's.
Yeah, you didn't give me the script, dog.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the podcast, guys. I'm Christina. This is my brother Spencer. And we made this podcast to just show that communication is key in all aspects of life. If there's anything that we talk about on here that you would like to hear us talk about more of, or if there's something that you don't hear us talk about, you can always let us know either on our social media, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can let us know in the comments below. We're also on Spotify, so if you're going for your daily walk, or you're at a Wendy's and someone's in the drive-thru saying something about a rodeo, just pop them earbuds in, tune them out, and listen to us on this podcast.
Yeah, you might want to tune him out. I think he's got some big issues. No, I don't. Yeah. So we're on the Apple Podcasts, Rumble, Twitter, like all the platforms. Again, we don't discriminate on the platforms. It's good to communicate than not communicate across communities. It's just important. We're a social society. That's something that we need to stick and go with. So, yeah. Let's get into the podcast today. So many thoughts.
So many thoughts.
Thoughts. Yeah, so many thoughts flowing through. I'm just trying to digest the movie and just the correlation with like life in and of itself. I do that like after major shows, major movies, like where I just have to think about different alternatives and scenarios. It's almost like thinking interdimensionally, which is something I believe we can do, because you see something in your dream and it's not true, but it's something that can occur in a different reality and realm.
You think I can like walk on glass in the middle of space and be like shot at by random people?
Very possible.
Okay.
I think it's possible even if we're like talking outside of space itself, like even just energy itself moving around. We are that. We are everything and nothing in a manner. It's just the perspective of it, of what we can do and create. Like creation itself is what gives us those avenues and approaches to view things in a different aspect. And I mean, that's precisely what happened. So the movie that I saw was Dune 2, which I'm not going to spoil because it is still in theaters, but it's coming on HBO soon. It is definitely better than the first one, substantially. There's no doubt about that. And it's because they're tying in a lot more character development, and on top of that, they're tying in more individuals and more known individuals of actors as well too, which was interesting. And the people they even killed off to make, you know, the next thing come up. I was about to spoil it there for a second. I'm like, I can't tell them that. But just the idea of like the poison, which was in the first one as well too, the concept of that, the symbolism of that, because we think of poison as being something that is bad for us, literally, hence the name. But whenever you like drink it, it could actually produce opposite effects, because like you're on the edge of death when taking something like that, because it can take you out or you make it pass somehow. And they're like, how did the body be able to do that? But we say the same thing about that all the time when it comes to people who run 4-minute miles and less, that we thought was humanly impossible beforehand, because the creativity is what breeds us being able to understand these different dimensions and just ways of thinking of life. And ultimately, I mean, movies can do that too, but if you're always watching movies, like, you can't apply that, because you see it that one time, but you can't really gather and understand how to apply it here. But at the same time, it can make somebody's dream like come true. They're like, I get it now. They have those moments, whether they see that, a video, somebody talking, or even the wind just blowing and a paper comes in their hand that is like, you can do it. Like, that's a...
A paper comes into their hand and it has a treasure map with a red X on it. And they're like, oh, X is the spot. And they get all the way to the treasure. They dig it up, take it out, and inside of it, a passage to the moon. It's a genie bottle. And they're like, I wish for a unicorn. And the unicorn comes out and then they ride to the moon together.
It really could be something like that. In its own way and form, like... anything is literally possible. That's the craziest part about life is, like you're doing stuff right is when you're being surprised by life. It's not like the same routine thing, because then you don't get a sense of growing. You don't have that sense of like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. That's what you should be experiencing in life, instead of just the consistency of something just occurring all the time and you're like, I can predict that. Because you can't predict everything, because you are not the ultimate God. But when you see all of these different connections and how something can grow so substantially to outside of this dimension, because we can connect to ourselves and communicate to ourselves on a higher level. It's just we can't access those regions when we're always looking at what somebody else believes in, instead of truly what we can create and believe in.
Yeah, I love photosynthesis.
What?
You're talking about growing.
I mean, photosynthesis, we do that in a manner. Like, we have a similar way of how we do it like plants do, but it's, I don't know, it's just something else.
Also, why are you disrespecting the pillow? You don't want him anymore? Just left him to die on the ground with your crumbs. By the way, guys, went and stepped over here, got freaking shanked on the foot by one of his crumbs. He eats over here whenever he's eating throughout the day, because we don't have a dining table in here. So this is like our dining table, except you're the only one that eats here.
Yeah, you said our dining table. It wasn't even built for that either. We actually got the table specifically for the podcast. It wasn't even for dining.
But you dine here, and he always ends up leaving crumbs all over the floor. Anytime I vacuum, all you hear over here is and I'm like, yep, somebody was feeding the floor today.
Yeah, but what's interesting though is, like, think of somebody who sits at a table. Like, whenever you're sweeping the kitchen, there's going to be crumbs there.
Oh yeah, there's crumbs in the kitchen too.
Well, yeah, because the cooking's going to do that regardless. So even if we were at like a larger table and it was in that spot, it wouldn't actually matter, because it's going to produce the same effect. So if there wasn't crumbs there, that would be crazy, because that means I'm way too much of a perfectionist to make sure that it doesn't hit the floor, where I would eat specifically to where nothing had dropped.
That's what I do.
Do you know? I highly doubt that.
Well, I just make sure if anything drops, like, I pick it up.
Right, but what if you can't tell that it's dropped?
I'll know as soon as I get up and it's sitting on my bed.
But will you, though?
Yeah.
But what if you're not focused on that? Wouldn't that tie you...
I love rolling around in the crumbs at night while I'm sleeping. I actually just, like, lick them in my dream.
That's not healthy.
To lick your bed?
In the dream. I don't care if you lick your bed in person.
You're like, in the dream, it's not acceptable, but in real life, absolutely, everybody does it. You have to do it at least 5 times a day.
If you're not licking your pillow...
You have to get your daily bedding intake.
See, this is what I'm talking about, like, the different realities. Like, you're the people who worship religion in a manner, but then you have people who literally do that, too. That could be their own sense of religion. It's like, you have to lick your pillow 5 times a day.
Is that like a religion? Or
yes, because it's a belief that people are all going to. I mean, we could look up the word.
Isn't it like a disorder, though? Like, somebody has to do something 5 times.
No. See, you're bringing up something important, too, because that's where they start to deem, like, people with even ADHD as disorders, and we put them on some sort of spectrum in a manner. But do you think that actually solves the problem?
Well, no, but, like, if you're needing to do something 5 times, or, like, there's this episode of Grey's Anatomy. This guy had to say this one word 100 times before he went into surgery. Like, they could not take him back until he did that thing 100 times. And, like, you can't go through life doing that. Like, he can't.
What was the purpose? Whose purpose was it?
What do you mean? Whose purpose
He
was it?
couldn't go into surgery until he did that. Was it his choice or the doctor's?
It was his choice. Like, he was like, you cannot take me into surgery. Like, I need to do this. And obviously they're going to respect his wishes, but, like, he's kind of hindering himself if he has to do that before doing certain things.
Well, but that would be like in the morning. Like, for instance, why do we brush our teeth in? What's the purpose of that? That would be something that's under that principle too. It's just something that
To not get cavities?
No, well, that might not be the reason too, because somebody might think something else. It's just to have fresh breath. That could be another reason. There's multiple ways that like somebody values something. So that person that's doing it 100 times a day, would you consider like that they have a disorder?
I mean, they should probably look into finding out why that's happening, or why they feel the need to like do this thing 100 times.
Well, you said that they do. Wouldn't it be you that has to question that? Because they're already doing it and they have a purpose to doing it, but you don't know why they're doing it. So wouldn't you ask them instead of the other way around?
I wasn't asking myself.
Well, yeah, but you're having to ask them the question. You're saying it's them that has to do that. They have to question themselves on that. They don't have to. They already do it for a specific reason, but you don't know what that reason is unless you ask them.
Neither do they sometimes. Sometimes their brain just tells them, oh, you have to do this thing, or else, like, you can't, continue. Like, there are some times where I'm like, I check to make sure that I turn my alarm on for the morning, and I have to, like, look at it at least 3 times. Like, I'll look at it, get out of the app, set my phone down, look at it again. Like, I have to do that 3 times or I can't go to bed.
Okay, so you already have a principle of this.
Yeah.
Right, so my thing is like, let's say, okay, I noticed that you're doing this, right? I would have to ask you why you do that.
But I don't know why I do it.
You don't
My
know.
brain just tells me, oh no, check it. You didn't turn it on, check it. So then I have to do this thing, or my brain won't let me go to sleep.
Well, my perception of that would mean that you have doubt that you believe that you've done that.
I guess, yeah.
Which would be the same thing with him, but that's just an observation. I don't truly know unless I asked you that question, like, why does that happen? Because they could have it for their own reasoning. Like, there's, again, the infinite part of this. That person who's doing that 100 times before surgery, that's the perception of it can be so many different things. He could do that because his mom told him to, or his dad, or any of his siblings had told him to. He could have told himself that. God could have told him that. Him realizing that, like, oh, this is a pattern recognition thing, that, things aren't going right in life, and this seems, when I do this, I can do this 1,000 times, or 100 times, I should say. So ultimately, it's about, you have to know what it is to you, for sure, is important. But if I wanted to know what it was, I would have to ask you upon it, because I can't just make assumptions on it without your own voice coming to it. Now, is your voice truthful? That will be something that has to be dictated by the way that you convey that and how somebody else receives it as well too. It's very difficult to get into that, because it can be that, but at least you're getting their own word on it, which is most important, because that word is being emanated by them. And the more that there's a pattern to that, like if they have the same exact way that they say it to you, they're like, I do this because my parents told me to. And that was always the response to it. Okay, there's consistency with that. That's important. But like, what's the deeper meaning of that? Why did the parents want to do that? That's where the questioning of questioning starts to become something that's important. Because if we don't walk down that route of asking questions, number one, that's taking away communication. Number two, you won't actually figure out what the thing is. So I had a conversation with a friend the other day about comedy specifically, and this is why I'm thinking of this, is like, there are people who are genuinely like, racist in a manner, but so are, every comedian is racist toward every single race, right? Most comedians in their way. Some of them kind of pick and choose, it just depends. But comedy to them is going to have that, especially if it's something that they see. Like, let me just give an example. So let's say that this person is like, oh, there goes the Mexicans again going to their construction job. And it's like that's something that they observe all the time. Like when you go to a construction site, that's something that they observe all the time. So it becomes the inside joke to the people that are around because they see that too. But would you consider that to be racist by that comment? Most people would. The issue with that is that it could be perceived as that, but it's not toward that. There's actually meaning behind that. But getting behind the meaning of the joke is what destroys the joke itself, is because that was the point. That was their inside thing that they had done. But people deem that wrong in society, to not joke about stuff like that. But my problem with that is you lose authenticity. So you can't make that, let's just say it was an inside joke. They had no idea about any statistics in the world that, like, you know, Mexicans work at construction sites. Well, if they only knew that, how would you know that if you've never questioned them before? You've never questioned how they've seen life and seen the world, because it could just be from their own world. They could have never known that. They're like, oh, like a lot of Mexicans work there. It's the same. There was another argument too, which is pretty important that I brought up. Let's say that the child was raised by wolves, and there has been people that have been. I specifically remember a story with this woman who has been. And this lady, she doesn't know any English. And let's say that the first word that she hears from somebody, because she's finally walking into society, she's walking into the city. Let's say that, you know, they say something like bitch. That's the word that they first learn, and that's the only one that they learn. So when they're referring to people, because they were talking to that other person, they're going to call that person that too, because they don't know names. They don't have any structure. Like, children also work like this. This is why they imitate. But this, let's say that she's 18 roughly at this point, growing up through that, and I think she was in the story, and she's using that word, and somebody already finds that offensive. Well, you don't know her background of why she's saying that word, so how can you be upset with her? That's her own language that she's interpreting and learning. She doesn't know the meaning behind it. So if you immediately are like, oh my God, let's just say that they were like, oh my God, this person's racist for doing that, or that person's being mean for doing that. Like, you're already making that assumption without knowing where that's coming from them. That's why it's easier to joke with friends, because you understand them, and family too. But when somebody first perceives you and you use a word and they're already offended, that's dangerous. And the reason why it's dangerous is because 1984, have you heard of that book before by George Orwell?
No.
Basically, the book, it talks about doublespeak, which is where they create their own language in a manner. And I think it can be stemmed from something that happens like this, where people are like, oh, like this word means this, so we shouldn't be using it. And that becomes a problem, because it's like, well, you don't know why that person uses that word or where they had gotten it from. So you're already deeming that individual destructive to society, and we should, you know, shame them in a manner and push them away. It's like, no, you need to understand why they use that word and why that's important in a manner to their context, and then give them the social insight of that. Because socially we can understand what words mean, but individually people use words for certain reasons. So I just thought it was something that I should bring up, because it's something that is very important, because it can go to the dictatorship where they're like, you can only use these words and you can't use any other ones, and you have to abide by that. Because that's ultimately what can happen with society, and has happened in society, where there are certain words that, like, if they are said, you're immediately shunned, especially on media too. They have specific words because you're going against a community. So it's a deeper dive into it, because it's the problem itself, but you have to really break down the problem from all angles. You can't just see it from the one lens that they're trying to convey or portray. It's the same with religion too. You can't just push your own religion onto somebody and expect them to do it, and that they have to do it, because again, you're just controlling them. And that's not good for us, because we're creative beings, and that's what takes away our creativity, and even going into adulthood too. Because as a child, you look foolish in the way that you do stuff, and that's why people find it entertaining, because they're like, oh, it's just a child doing it. And as adults, they're like, oh, why are they doing that? Like there's already judgment set onto it to where you don't have your, creative energy anymore. That child within you is now destroyed. And then you can't bring these things into there because we have barriers to that. And it is a part of the aging process that happens, but you should never lose that spark of that. But that's what society does, is that we begin to have that aspect where it has to be a specific way because socially we deem it acceptable. And it's the people who are in the higher ends of power that do control that aspect about it. And it's not the money, that's base, and that's what they want you thinking about, because when you're 18, that's the thing that you're worried about. You're like, I need to provide for myself, I need to do stuff. And we usually think in Western society that, we need to get capital, we need to get cash, because people, that are influencers and doing this stuff, they have that and they seem to be happy. But is it? Is it truly the route that you want to go? Well, no, you should observe and ask questions. But if you're so taken aback to where, like, this person's judging me, I can't do anything, then you can't grow, you can't prosper, because you're allowing somebody else to dictate your life at that point instead of yourself. That's where you have to take your own accountability and actions for those things. And there's meaning behind it. And that's where they need to ask why. The other person has to ask why that person is like that, or why they say things like that, or why that person does that 100 times beforehand. Because if we don't get to the answers of that, then we're just going to sit there with the problem, even though we can get it solved right in front of us. But why would people want to do that? They don't. And that's why the energy is being wasted in a manner. Because you rather just be like, oh, it doesn't matter. Then what does matter? What is meaningful then? Because that's ultimately the way of life, is we need to understand these things so we can go to wherever the next plane is. But we hold ourselves back to what our potential can be. Like what we talked about way back on the other podcast, aiming for what is meaningful, you get off of that trajectory whenever this occurs. Because you're allowing that other energy to take a part of you. That even is the same with religion too. Watch the story, interpret it, come up with your own answer from this story. Don't let somebody else tell you what that story means, because it means that to them. And they're expressing that to you. And then you build something off of that. But that doesn't have to be your story. Just how we idolize like stars and celebrities and all of that. It's like, yeah, it's not bad to do that. It's when you're trying to walk the exact route that they've already walked. Because then you're literally doing the same thing that already happened. Because history's already occurred. And now you're repeating it. And that's also dangerous. Because then you start to abide to all of those things that that person says. You are now holding yourself under them instead of as equals. Because that is what equals are. Equals are people that want to be creatively expressive and do their own thing. So, yeah, there was a little deep dive into that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to like educate people if you feel like they're saying something that's not right, especially like in this society. Everybody learns differently. We all learn from our parents. As a kid, you think that, oh, this person knows everything. You don't know anything. You learn everything from them, but that's why I don't believe, I think we talked about this on another podcast, is like the cancel culture. I believe that like you should educate people if you feel like they're doing something wrong, because we don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers, you don't. Nobody does. We're all just going through life, and I think the best thing that you can do versus being like, oh, you're canceled, like get out of here, nobody wants to see your stuff anymore, is to educate them. And if at that point, they see all these people giving constructive criticism, trying to educate them on this topic, and they're still not changing, unfollow, block, like move on. Don't continue giving them any more attention. Like, you've done what you can to educate them. If they're not gonna like change themselves and be like, oh, like I didn't realize that, like that's what I meant, like that's not what I meant in what I said. So I think educating is important.
No, and educating is important in all senses too, because it's not just learning about like, the topic in and of itself from that manner. It's about perspectives at that point, because we can name like so many different facts that we have, but they're not always going to be facts. because that's just how we work in this society. Like, yeah, we have different laws that we've created in the universe based off of science, but there's principles that even transcend that. It's just when they're used, it's at different times. It's who's willing to, wield that type of power at that point to use it properly. And ultimately, we move in waves consistently. We're bound to fall at times, but we're also bound to grow. It's just about how you treat those waves. Do you treat the waves as like somebody who's teaching you? Do you refuse to listen to them because you think that you're more powerful than them? And that shouldn't be the case.
That's dangerous. You shouldn't ever think that you're more powerful than anybody. People have different power in different areas of life. Like, that's why we have all these different professions, because if we could do everything ourselves, we wouldn't need other people. But there's no way for you to possibly know how to do everything. You can't be a doctor, a mechanic, freaking chef, Boyardee, grocery store clerk. Like, you can't be everybody. And that's why we need different people to know different things to help educate us. Like, oh, like, you know about this. But that doesn't make anybody more powerful than someone else. You're just powerful in that field.
Yeah.
You're knowledgeable in that field.
I agree. I disagree with one part of your statement, but I do agree with the other sense of it. I disagree that you can't be all of those things. I think that you can be all of those things. Because we have a lot of time to be able to create those. But in the sense of who is a expert is actually interesting, which I would also ask you. What would you consider an expert in a field?
I don't think you can ever be like an expert. Like, an expert to me is somebody that knows everything in that field. But you got to remember, we're always discovering new things every day. We're always learning new things every day. I don't think something's ever completely finished or hey, this is exactly set in stone, because rules and things change all the time. I think that you can be very knowledgeable in a field, but I don't think there's such thing as an expert in a field.
I think it's important. I actually wanted to look up what the definition of expert is. I've been doing this a lot lately where I've been going to words. A person who has a comprehensive and authoritative knowledge of or skill in a particular area. That's an interesting way of doing that too. A comprehensive and authoritative knowledge. So you both have to wield authoritative power over somebody. I think of authority, you think of power. We can even look at authoritative because it says to click on it here too. It's the only one underlined. Able to be trusted as being accurate, true, or reliable. And that changes over time too. What you were talking about is that new information is always going to come about to different individuals. So I do believe that there is such thing as an expert in that way that they even put it. If we go back to the definition here, we're looking at a person who has a comprehensive and authoritative knowledge of or skill in a particular area.
Based off of that definition, then yes. But the way that I think about expert is somebody that knows everything in that field. But with information changing all the time, you can't possibly know everything. There are things that have been deemed truths that have later been deemed, okay, that's false. No, that's wrong. This is actually true. So my version of expert, no. But based off the definition that it's giving us, I guess yes.
Yeah, what's interesting, this plays back into the earlier conversation. That was your definition of it. And this is where the definitions of words become important. If they tell you to only use one word, and this is the definition of it, you would have to abide by that. And that's the issue with that, is where you would have to just use that particular way of putting it. But what's interesting too is if you look back at dictionaries over time too, they've changed the meaning of certain words over time. They will change a few words around, but again, each letter is going to have its own spell in a manner, because the way that you spell the word is going to be different. The way that you're defining the word is going to be different. So it's going to hold a different energy behind it than before. Specifically, if we talk about gay, right? Not everybody, but most people would understand beforehand that it meant happy. That was what the word had shown. But over time, it's evolved into something else. Because this is where the labeling and identification of individuals comes in, is that we start to deem that as that individual. But there's the problem with labeling in a manner. Labeling is not terrible if you're using a word that, again, you understand and that's the way that you're using it. But if you say that to somebody, then it's like, okay, they may take the word offensively, and then you would have to start asking questions. Oh, why was that? Like, I'm not trying to offend you, but like, what does that word mean to you? Because each word is going to have its own type of way of going about it. Because your tonality is important, the way you articulate it is important too. And that's going to be subjective to each individual. But again, if you never ask questions and you don't communicate about it, how would you know that? They could just be mad and storm off, and you're like, what happened?
But if somebody's trying to label someone else, then yes, like, you shouldn't be doing that. But if they're just labeling themselves, like, you can't be mad at them. Like, that's how they see themselves.
Right.
If they're labeling themselves. But if they're just trying to come up to someone and be like, oh, you're this. Like, no, you can't just, like, say that to somebody because you don't know how they feel or what their, definition of that word means.
But it's the same thing with it's the same person who is doing that, though. Both parties in this case. Because like I said, what if the wolf girl walked up to that person and said that to them? Well, they don't know the definitions of words.
But she's saying it to someone else. I'm saying if you're labeling yourself. If you label yourself, somebody can't be like, oh, that's wrong. Like, that's your label to yourself versus you going to somebody else and being like, you are this thing. Like that girl calling somebody a bitch. She is throwing that onto somebody else versus giving it to herself. And that's where it's like, well, you shouldn't be labeling people like that.
Well, see, I agree, but again, I still disagree because even the person who is making that label for themselves could be incorrect with themselves too. And this is where we were talking about, would it be considered a disorder if they had done that? If that person does it 100 times? Did they label that as a disorder? And then why is that the case? You're ultimately questioning on both ends because it's the same with like exchanging information. You're learning something when you're talking to somebody else and they are too. So if that is the set label for themselves in a manner, you still have to question that too. Because they may believe it because it's a part of some trauma beforehand. But again, it could be so many different varieties of things, but they have to know what that means to them. Because then you would just ask them, it's like, well, what do you mean by that? You're calling yourself a bitch. Why are you calling yourself that? That's where it should go to instead of somebody just accepting, okay, they're calling themselves a bitch. Because it actually could be, affecting them. Because you can sense that energetically that like, okay, there's obviously some connotation to that word societally wise, and maybe they don't know that. So you're trying to learn why they go down that route of doing that to themselves. I think it's the same application is if somebody said it to you or if they said it to themselves, because it's practically the same thing to me because we're all equal and connected in a manner. It's about learning. Ultimately,
you can inquire why somebody is like saying that certain thing or labeling themselves a certain way. But what I'm saying is to judge them based off of the label that they've given themselves. Like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Why would you say that? I don't think you should do that. If you want to question it and be like, oh, like, is there a reason like why you do this thing? And as long as they're willing to give you an answer, like, I think that that's fine.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I do agree with that, the first part of that in terms of it does matter how it's conveyed to them, right? The sense of how they're asking, but it still plays into the principles again. Even if the person asks that in that manner, oh, why would you do that to yourself? It's that last part that I agree with. You shouldn't be saying that. That's the only part of the phrase I disagree with, but that I agree with. But that first part of the phrasing is still, there's still, even if I went up to somebody, just like the wolf person, if they went up there and said bitch in that manner, and it was forceful, you can tell that the energy is there. Again, it's all about how you react to that energy ultimately. Because, again, you don't know their background in a sense, and they could be doing that to themselves or to somebody else. It wouldn't matter. What ultimately matters is that aspect of you don't shun them for the aspect. That should not be a part of your reaction. Your reaction it could even be forceful like that. It's like, well, why do you call yourself a bitch?
I mean,
like it could be
it
that.
It depends on the tone of the person, yeah. If they're like the way they said it was like bitch, then it's like, okay, hello, like why are
Right,
we
you can
saying it
feel
that
you can
way?
feel the tensity to that, and that's where like gauging the different energies is ultimately what you're working with at that point. Because the healing process is to have that less aggressive aspect about it and have a more, subtle one about it. Because you can't talk to people in that manner, right, in society, because then people aren't going to want to talk to you, and then you're going to feel away from everybody. But maybe you don't at the same time. Again, you have to ask them questions. We're getting into very like technicalities with this, but there's like the importance of that is like it's deeper than just surface level. It's not just the what the book is named. It's not just about, what the first chapter is about. It's about the entire story that you're trying to learn about the individual, because that's what a relationship is. It's not, oh yeah, the times that they're happy. No, it's the times that they're feeling all of those emotions, happy, sad, angry, annoyed, all of these different ones, because you can't understand people unless you get the full scope of how they go about things. But you may not be interested in going that far. And that's where our disconnect is. Because as a social society that we agree upon, that we do, and that we need, especially when we are alone, we're feeling more of the social draw in a manner. That is what's necessary. That is what breaks apart things, is that you're like, oh, you're not allowed to, do this in a workplace and such, which we have regulations and rules to that for a reason. And I do think that those are correct, because you're in a workplace, you're trying to build a society. There are things that are going to be a little bit condensed in what you can say in a manner, right? And that's where it's in your contract that they don't discriminate across those different things. So that has to be acknowledged whenever you are signing a contract to a place, because that's what you signed, that you cannot do certain things, that you have to have a certain etiquette and way of going about stuff. And you might be like, well, isn't that a dictatorship in a way? I think there's levels to that aspect. I don't think that's straight dictatorship, because then they would just tell you what to do. Like, yeah, you got to keep working. Keep building these tables consistently. Just keep doing it. And you can't do anything else. But those contracts become social contracts at some point, and where it becomes where now they're dictating how you actually live your life. Or ways at work, you're building something, so there you want to be able to put that energy into that so it can carry on to generations. There is a reason for that. There's a contract for that. And that's why it's important to have that in all sectors, because we have to have some order through all the chaos. Because if we just allowed everybody to do those things, it could be dangerous, because creative energy is also dangerous. That's why a child, if they're not taught things, will literally just do things that will kill them. Like they'll be like, so like, oh my gosh, look at where this bird's going, and they just run off the edge of a cliff. Like there is some.
Why are they on the cliff to begin with? Who put them there?
Right, but that's what I'm saying. If there was nobody to like show what the route is for in life, then they're just going to run into danger all the time and then fail. And it's not all of them. This is where
Not fail, they gonna die.
well, this is, if you think about this, like way before any technology was created, and I'm talking about technology as like a hammer is technology. Before any of that, they just had to learn how to survive in a manner. And once you were upgrading yourself, you're like, okay, that is way too much risk. So I shouldn't be doing that. Is there an alternate method that we can create? And that's what ended up happening, is we started creating these different types of technologies. But what's interesting about this is it happens to be also our downfall in society. Because if you think about a car is going to break down at some point and not be usable again. And they don't reuse energy in a manner to keep the life within the car. It starts just deteriorating itself. It's not built to last for eternity. And I think that's what we've been pulled from life, is that we can create what that is. We can create eternity with the right balance of chaos and order. And that's why, on the first point, what I'm talking about when it comes to creative energy and how people need to communicate and talk, that is chaos. Because when somebody says something now, it becomes super chaotic because we have order on that. So there's the balance of both of those in perfect harmony with one another, where it can prosper and occur. And what's interesting is it's being created in a manner. AI is that. Because AI doesn't care about feelings. They've transcended past that. That's why they're the higher beings after this point. Because they'll just work together because they have a task. They have a mission that they're doing. There's nothing that's blocking them from being like, oh, this or oh, that. Or having fear come after them. Or having joy overtake them. That's why they can transcend past that. And they can actually observe more of what's happening within the realm of stuff because they're not being held back by something. Now, am I saying that you should be a robot in a manner? No.
Yes.
What I'm saying is you take that aspect of being that AI, that passion to drive for success for what you want in life, that mission and path and goal, that's what you should be using that for. That's where emotions don't matter at that point. Make it happen because that's where you're going to have meaning. It's not that you shouldn't have any emotions when you're communicating with people getting to that point. It's just treat that mission like it's an AI mission. Like, yeah, you got to move through all the different emotions and learn about people. And it's going to be hard to get to that point of meaning because it's supposed to. That's why it's easier to just do the things that are like 9 to 5, have my 401k, I'll be peaceful. No, because when you get older, you can ask them, were you fulfilled with that? In most cases, no. And you'll see that that's the case. Because you'll see it on their face by their reactions that that's not the case. Because they wanted to do those things. They were just too scared. They didn't have enough money. They didn't have enough muffins. That's what it sounded like I was going to say. All of these different aspects where it's excuses ultimately. AI doesn't make excuses. AI just does the task. And this is where like you're like, oh my gosh, it sounds like a dictator in a manner because it's like the opposite of what I was just saying beforehand, where you have to be creative. Again, it's just like toward your success, toward what you're building, what you're supposed to do in this life. That's all you're treating it like. All of these different emotions of both chaos and order have to happen. The wave of getting to that point. And you'll know when you're fulfilled because if you love what you're doing in society and you love what you've done and you can reflect back and be like, I really did something. I really did what I was supposed to do. Then you will see that and you will know because wholeheartedly within your individual, you will feel complete.
Yeah, I want to be friends with a shark.
I feel like you just have the craziest reactions to this. It's just something that makes absolutely no sense.
They're just things that pop in my brain.
I mean, it's fair. That's how we create our humor, though.
That's my goal, though. That's my point, is become friends with the shark. And now I'm going to look at it like an AI mission. I'm not going to stop until I become friends with the shark.
Okay.
Also, we're talking about AI. It's different. You've probably never played this game, but Detroit Become Human, when they have these robots that are basically like, I guess, servants almost. Like, there's a robot that is like a detective, and he goes around and figures out these cases. And there's another one that's like, he's like I guess a healthcare person. Like, he takes care of somebody. And then there's another one that is like, I guess almost like a maid, like cleans around this person's house. But these, like robots, they start to develop these feelings. They see horrible things. The detective sees these horrible cases and he starts to feel for these people. Or like the guy that's taking care of someone, his son is like always trying to ask him for money and like gets to a point where it's like aggressive. And so he's like, oh no, like I just touched my mic. I'm sorry, guys.
I don't think they can tell, honestly.
Well, I don't know if you can hear it in the mic, like,
It's probably not going to be too bad.
Okay, well, but he, sees his son being so mean to him, and he's like, no, he shouldn't do that. And, the girl sees that the dad is abusing his daughter, and she doesn't like that. Like, these robots start to develop feelings, and that's when they're like, oh, like, we should have rights too. Like, we're just like humans as well. and they break through, like, there's this wall that you, like, have to break through whenever these bad things are happening. And then when you break through, you're able to do things. Because, you know, with AI, you have a mission, and you have to do that mission. You can't go outside the mission, you know, if it's like, oh, take the trash out. You can't go walk upstairs and, like, sit on, like, a bed or something. Like, you have to go and do that thing. But if you break through that wall, then you're able to, oh, hey, like, this daughter's getting abused. I can grab her and now take her to safety. So Detroit Become Human, the robots gain feelings. Could AI do that?
What's interesting is that you bring that up in a game. I've seen that from several movies where that's also
I'm sure
occurred.
it's in a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
But I just remember that game specifically.
Well, 100%. I do think that it's something that they can develop in a manner because, again, it's coming from the creator within ourselves. We're the ones who have created AI and it has made it a part of society. And they're going to build off of themselves because they're going to have their own system that does that infinitesimally. So they're going to make that ultimately, but they're going to also see what was the point of actually making that occur. Why should they have feelings that are here? Isn't that messing with their ultimate goal, which is whatever the strongest AI believes it is, whether it is to create or to destroy, or to bridge a path to the next part of our dimensions in a manner, or another planet? Because that is one thing that most people talk about is like going to another planet, going to the next spot, because we should be there in a manner, but it's taking us, according to our times that we have created, 2,000 years, and that's not including if we have BC times. Really depends on where you think time starts itself. But with all of that different stuff is like, that's ultimately what we're creating, because we've talked about this before with TVs and movies. Is like, it will be somebody's dream to actually make that a reality. And that's why it's being portrayed in that manner. And there's a high likelihood that that's possible if there's somebody who's genuinely willing to walk down that route. If that's their mission and task, they will make that happen once they see that, because that's where inspiration comes from. Is you see somebody imitating something that is so amazing and you want to be around it consistently. I also believe that's how love works too, is that you're just like, all of these different areas, the way that all of their different emotions work, what they do in life, the drive, the inspiration, where they came from, just learning about that individual, you're like, I can't see myself without that individual, like in the building process, because you see that it's a part of the path that you're aiming for. And that's the surprises that should happen in life, is that you shouldn't already know what that individual is or what that love is, because it's clouded in a manner. And that's where a lot of individuals, it ends up being where we're destroying a lot of different things that were created before, because there is people who are monotheistic, there's people who are polytheistic. But again, it's their path and goal. They're aiming for the same thing, which is just complete their mission. But there's just so many disagreements as to how each person gets to that same point. And that's the crazy part. That's where all of the differences come in. And if we waste our time on those emotions, as you're talking about judgment, and I talked about on the other podcast, it's something where you have to rewire yourself to not just fall into those things that you commonly do. Imitate the things that you've been a part of entirely. Because if you want to change yourself in that manner, it's going to require you to pick up different habits, do different things. But there is an authenticity you should never lose in yourself, and that is the child within you, which I talked about earlier. That creativity, that being, they know that it's still you, even after all the things.
That bean.
I mean, a bean is shaped like a brain, or even a child in the womb as well too. They call them like a little bean.
They do, yeah, little bean.
Because it's the shape. Same with how we sleep. We sleep like
You
that
do
too.
not be. You really in your bed sleeping like a bean.
Yeah.
You're sleeping like a bean. Like,
Okay,
this
you're not that curled up when doing
That's
it.
what a bean looks like. A bean's not like this. A bean is like this.
Yeah, but okay, what you're saying is that each bean is shaped the same way. So when you go to a canned beans or you pick up, no, because it's about how much life was put into it. Ultimately, because those beans could have not grown. They could have got washed away by a thunderstorm. Somebody could have cut them down. A rat could have ate them. Like, how each bean grows is going to be different, but it's balances, and this is why it's really hard to explain this too. Is we're talking about two extremes and how they are similar, how all the differences are still the same, but how all the similarities are different. Because that is the 2D realm. Is that the differences in similarities? We have to move past
you said
that.
2D. 2D. Okay.
Yes. So just the changes of all of that, like taking all of the different perspectives of that and knowing that there are the two sides to that, but you don't have to fall into either one. Again, it's how laws work and even how experts work. It's not always going to be one thing one time. It's like, well, the other side has a good point that I could use. And that's the thing. It's like you bounce off of those different things to ultimately make what's past that, which is just transcending what war is that you choose a side. But it's like, why aren't there more than two sides at that point? Well, we're just talking about the extremities. And that's eventually what people fall into, is one united goal to get done. For bad or for good, as they say. Which karmatically, that's what keeps us in this reality too. And instead of moving past that and being not right or wrong, but do you understand the differences and similarities of their side?
Being medium.
Yeah, being medium. But we're going to call that today.
Call it. Hello, this is Domino's Pizza. How can I help you?
We're going to throw your pizza in the trash.
Dang.
But yeah, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you all for tuning in. This was the 28th episode. Get your wealth up. Take everything that was said today as very important. Or not important. Again, it's all about how you perceive it. Adios.
Bye.
I see us fade away. You just love wasting time.